Life Unrehearsed, brought to you by Lianas Senior Transition Support, helping you navigate home care and senior residences.
Yeah, good afternoon. Welcome to Life Unrehearsed. I'm Matt Delvecchio, specializing in home care, downsizing, and the senior living industry. Thank you for tuning in on a pretty mild weekend. Coming up on the first half of the show, I'm going to be talking to Dr. David Mulder. You know Dr. Mulder. He was with the Montreal Canadiens organization for decades, including as their head physician since 1999. So I thought it'd be nice for our listeners to hear about his career and to share some of his experiences, because he has certainly seen it all. And on the second half of the show, discover the importance of proper skincare as you age and why oldsters are becoming the in crowd. All right, I've been looking forward to this for a while. I literally bumped into Dr. Mulder as I was doing the rounds with some clients and social workers at the Montreal General Hospital, and I asked him if he wouldn't mind joining me on Life Unrehearsed, and he didn't hesitate. Really honored to have Dr. Mulder on the show. He recently retired as the head physician of the Montreal Canadiens, but is still active in the medical community. Dr. Mulder, welcome to Life Unrehearsed.
Oh, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me here. Wow, a 60-year career, Dr. Mulder. For our listeners, can we hear about your early years and growing up and your family?
Sure. I grew up in a small Saskatchewan farm town. My parents were both immigrants to Canada, my mother from Scotland and my father from Holland. And he was a farmer, and like all Saskatchewan boys, I grew up playing hockey, and my goal was to play in the NHL.
Amazing. And you know, farm boy in Saskatchewan, and just an amazing career from there on in. I'm interested, Dr. Mulder, how you got drawn into medicine.
Well, there were probably two or three factors. One was the small town I grew up in had a very important family doctor who looked after us all, including several injuries and illnesses. And he was someone that I admired greatly. And then the other person was my hockey coach. When he told me he didn't think I would ever make the NHL, he suggested that I go to university, and we talked about what would be a good career choice, and it was him that suggested perhaps medicine might be a good avenue for myself. So those are two factors, clearly.
And, you know, and good advice. And I think there's many Montreal Canadiens hockey players that thank them for that advice. And you ended up choosing the medical field. I'd love to hear your career path and how you got started, to where you got educated, and where you first started off as in medicine.
Yeah, well, I went to the University of Saskatchewan from the farm town, and I did my medical degree there. And in those days, everyone did what they called a rotating internship. And I did that and also in Saskatchewan at the University Hospital. And but when I was graduating from medicine, our visiting professor was Dr. Rock Robertson, who was a newly appointed chief of surgery at the Montreal General Hospital. And I sat beside him at the graduation banquet, and he asked me what I wanted to do. And I told him I wanted to be a surgeon, and he said, well, why don't you come to the Montreal General Hospital? And I said, well, I didn't apply there. He said, that's okay. If you accept my handshake, you'll get a job. Just check with Mrs. McMurray when you come on July 1st. And so with no contract, I set out from the small town with a wife and a newborn baby, and started surgical training at the Montreal General Hospital, where I completed my general surgical training. And then I went to the University of Iowa for 2 years to train in thoracic surgery. And then went on staff at the Montreal General and have been there virtually ever since.
Listening to Life Unrehearsed. That's the voice of Dr. David Mulder, who was the head physician of the Montreal Canadiens for many years and a 60-year career in medicine. Love the beginning and amazing on a handshake. And you picked up with your wife, and at the time, I think one child. I believe you have 3 children, correct, Dr. Mulder? Now
We do. We had 2 children.
All right. Went to Iowa, came back to Montreal, and I'd love to hear about your start with the Montreal Canadiens. How did that all get started?
Well, that's an interesting story. Also, as you know, I always had an interest in hockey, and in my first year in 1963, I was on general surgery, and I rotated through, and I met Dr. Kinnear, who was then the team physician for the Montreal Canadiens, and we talked hockey a bit, and he saw I was interested in hockey and knew a little about it, and he said, look, I've just taken over care of the Montreal Canadiens medical, and he said, I have to look after the junior Canadiens, and how would you like to cover the games at the Montreal Forum every Sunday afternoon? And he said, if you put together a team of residents, I'll help you get started. So that's the way I got started with the Montreal Junior Canadiens. And Dr. Kinnear accompanied me on the first game or so just to show me the ropes of the clinic and where things were. And but that's how I got started with the Junior Canadiens.
And hats off to Dr. Kinnear to get you started with the junior Habs. And, there are so many stories, Dr. Mulder, that I'm sure you could share. I'd like to talk about a few of them. And I want to go way back to those years in the early 60s when you were with the Junior Canadiens. And I understand you even had to stitch up Bobby Orr. Is that correct? When he was with the Oshawa Generals, I believe.
That's right. And he was very young, I perhaps 17, when, and I think he was my first patient. And he got hit with, I think, a puck or a stick, and had a cut on his forehead. And scalp wounds, as you know, bleed a lot. And so he was bleeding from his scalp wound, and he came into the small clinic that we had at the old Forum, and we got him sutured up. Dr. Kinnear was with me at the time, actually, and so he sort of okayed the way I sutured him up. But after we got him cleaned up, I said, "Okay, Bobby, you're ready to go on the ice." And he said, "No, he wanted a wet towel." And I said, "No, we were clean." And he said, so we gave him the wet towel, and he got down on his hands and knees and cleaned the floor of the clinic from the drops of blood that he'd spread while coming into the clinic. And I guess that sort of is a reflection of the character of this man.
Unbelievable. Here you are stitching him up, and he's cleaning up after his own mess and then
Exactly.
heading out onto the ice. And that I think you're absolutely right. A true reflection of who Bobby Orr was and still is. Listening to Life Unrehearsed, talking to Dr. David Mulder about his 6-decade career in medicine. And I'd love to hear about Dr. Kinnear, obviously a mentor for you, got you started, and you eventually become the head physician of the Montreal Canadiens. I think it was in 1999. Can you tell us about that time in your life?
Yes, well, that was a very exciting honor to although I worked with Dr. Kinnear and helped him out to take over on my own with the Montreal Canadiens was an incredible honor and opportunity, and something which I still relish.
And a lot of things changed. Doctors used to be up in the stands. Eventually, you were one of the leaders for being right there near the bench. And I think a young Trent McCleary was extremely happy, and I would say fortunate that you were nearby. Can you tell us about that very scary story?
Yeah, that was occurred on Super Bowl weekend, and the Canadiens were playing the Flyers, and Trent McCleary blocked went down to block a shot, and rather than hitting him on the chest or the pads, it hit him right on the neck, over the larynx, the voice box, and it fractured and he was able to get up and skate, and then collapse just as he got to the bench. And we'd seen what happened, and so I ran around, and we took him into the clinic, and very quickly it appeared that he was going to lose his ability to breathe. And so part of my career background has always been an interest in trauma or injury, car accidents and gunshot wounds. And so I was used to handling the airway, and we, with other colleagues, and we were able to do it what they called a chin lift or a jaw thrust, and lifted up his mandible and able to get him to breathe. And then we rushed him to the hospital where we were able to do a tracheostomy and resolve things. But it was a close call.
Close call indeed. Matter of seconds and minutes, and can't possibly imagine that scene. We're talking with Dr. David Mulder. Dr. Mulder, we have to head out to traffic. We're going to continue with one or two more stories, and we're also going to talk about trauma. It is much more than the Montreal Canadiens, how you've contributed to the medical world. But one story, which you've even called it as your most moving experience of your life with one of the Montreal Canadiens, and we're going to say what that experience was and who that Hab was with the Montreal Canadiens. Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. Matt Delvecchio here, and I'm talking with Dr. David Mulder, who served with the Montreal Canadiens organization for over 60 years. Dr. Mulder has been sharing a couple of stories with us. Boy, Dr. Mulder, you could be on the entire show talking about the stories. There's just two that I would like to hear your version of, two very impactful stories. I was actually at the game when Max Pacioretty was run into the stanchion by Zdeno Chara. I will never forget that. I was with my dad and a couple of friends, and just the sound of him hitting that stanchion and then falling down, you could hear a pin drop at the Bell Center, and he was motionless. My goodness, I thought he was dead. He was, in fact, on the ice for over 6 minutes and ended up having a vertebral fracture. Can you tell us about, you're there in the middle of it. What was that story like?
Well, that was frightening. At that time, we sat right behind the Canadiens bench, so the event occurred right in front of us. And at that time, he hit the stanchion related to the Canadiens bench, and in those days, they were square and not protected, and he hit his head against the stanchion and went down like a stone. And we were right there. We were able to go out and get his airway back, but he was clearly unconscious. And so it took our team a few minutes to get him in a proper position to protect his spinal cord and get him transferred appropriately to our clinic, which is a short distance away, and then on to the Montreal General Hospital, where we're so fortunate to have the support of the hospital all these years. And he had an immediate CT scan of the head and the spinal canal, and this demonstrated the fracture, but no damage to the cord. And we observed him, and he was allowed to begin a rehabilitation project. It was a frightening episode.
Frightening indeed. Again, another experience that you're there, and really, thank goodness for Max had you and the team there. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the trauma center. So important, and you've been a leader with trauma. Just one more quick story, and you've called this, I read it in an article where you've mentioned that this is the most moving experience of your life. And can you tell us about the time when Saku Koivu came back from his cancer treatments?
Yes, that was an incredible thing for me. Saku had been diagnosed and treated for a lymphoma by our team at the Montreal General Hospital, headed up by Dr. Blair Whittemore, but it involved a complicated course of chemotherapy and radiotherapy, intraspinal chemotherapy, and all of it took a matter of several months, actually. But he was able to get through it all. And he went out to Sherbrooke and had a PET scan, which was new at that time, and it showed there was no evidence of disease. So he was allowed to begin a program and return to play. And as you probably remember, he had a long standing ovation, and it was really something to see. And I think probably it was certainly the most emotional thing that I'd ever been through. Related to hockey.
And that's saying something after everything you have seen. And I think for those diehard Habs fans, you know exactly where you were when he was getting that standing ovation when he came back. That was quite special. Dr. Mulder, I'd like to talk to you about, some non-Habs experiences. Montreal General Hospital, near and dear to your heart. You were the former surgeon in chief. You were the chairman of the Department of Surgery and director of the Division of Cardiovascular and Thoracic Surgery at Montreal's McGill University. And in 2015, the hospital named its world-renowned trauma center after you. So you are a true leader, some would say pioneer, when it comes to trauma. Can you tell us a little bit more about the Montreal General Hospital and how fortunate we are to have a trauma center right here?
Well, during my career, I think dating back to Iowa, I developed a real interest in trauma, and particularly trauma to the airway. And that led me, when I first came back from Iowa, to do a study. And I was shocked to learn that at the Montreal General Hospital, our mortality rate for trauma, equivalent trauma, was 50%, whereas in the U.S. it was 7 or 8%. And we looked at all the factors, and we decided that the lack of trauma centers was an important factor. And we then, with a group of colleagues from Montreal and Quebec City, we approached the Minister of Health in Quebec to develop the concept of trauma centers, which he was very responsive to. And we suggested there be a trauma center for every university in Quebec. And so we established 4 level 1 trauma centers. And then several years later, we did a study on mortality for equivalent trauma and found that our rate had dropped originally down to about 10%, and now is down to comparable to any in the USA, which was very, very important for me.
Oh, important, something that you should be proud of, and Montrealers are very grateful for. Imagine coming from 50% down to U.S. levels at 7 or 8%, and really congratulations on you leading the way and making this happen. And we should be very proud of what we've got now. You in the fall of 2023, it was announced that you're taking your retirement as head physician of the Montreal Canadiens. I understand you're still acting as an advisor. So what was that like, having to announce your retirement? And I know family was very close and they did a lot of celebration, and I'd love to hear your feelings about that time.
Well, it was, in terms of my age and the demands of looking after the Montreal Canadiens, and by this time we developed a very good team around us, with Dr. Dan Deckelbaum assuming a leadership role, and it was time to let him take over and bow to a younger and smarter generation.
Yeah, and I'm sure it was bittersweet for you, but sort of passing the torch in Habs fashion, passing the torch. And you know about the medical team there, and I'd love to get your opinion on the Canadiens' medical team and some thoughts there moving forward, because medicine and I guess therapy and recovery is a lot different than it was when you started 60 years ago, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. It's in fact, even the medical coverage now. And the NHL has done so many important things to prevent and to ameliorate the care of the concussion patient, to the care of serious injury. And it's actually coincided with the developments in trauma. So we've been able to bring all that to bear on the Montreal Canadiens medical care and develop the team around us. But for instance, when we started, Dr. Kinnear and I would often look after a game all by ourselves. And now with the NHL standards, we have an orthopedic surgeon there, we have an emergency room doctor there, we have a sports medicine doctor there, we have a dentist. So we have a team of 6 or 8 people at every game. And the care they get is absolutely superb. We've developed the facilities there so that our emergency room is the equivalent to an emergency room in the hospital, has all the things that are required for trauma care. And during the last 10 years, we've been able to build an X-ray suite in the Montreal, in the Bell Center, that allows us to do investigations that are right on the spot, that perhaps allow some players to go back as quickly as the same game, and allows others to know that we have to send them to the hospital. So we really have a first-rate medical team, including all the physicians and a group of athletic therapists that are second to none.
Talking with Dr. David Mulder here on Life on Rehearse. Dr. Mulder, we're just going to wrap it up. Although you have retired as head physician of the Montreal Canadiens, you are still actively involved in the community. Can you tell us a quick day in the life of Dr. Mulder today?
Well, I go into the hospital every day and involved with thoracic surgery and see patients. I don't go to the operating room anymore, but I do consults. I teach the medical students and the residents and participate in community activities. One of my major goals now is to address the fact that Quebec is the only province in Canada that doesn't have a helicopter pre-hospital care system. And that's my burning desire now to make that happen, which will be extremely important for Quebec.
Mm. Absolutely. And keep fighting. We know you're a fighter, and we want to thank you very much, Dr. Mulder, for joining me here on Life on Rehearse on a Sunday, taking a little time to listen to some wonderful stories. And on behalf of all Montrealers and Habs fans, we want to thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's Dr. David Mulder, who served with the Montreal Canadiens organization for 60 years and recently retired as their head physician and still serves as an advisor to them. He continues to work at the Montreal General Hospital.